That's
This
concept
conference will now be recorded.
we did talk about the creating the objects and what are the data types available, and we did discuss extensively about on the DML operations, how to insert the data, how to retrieve the data, and how to update the data, how to merge the data, how to upsert, and all those things so all the DML operations that we have been going through on all these exercises. And we did discuss about how to write the SQL queries, meaning SOQL, Salesforce Object Query Languages, all those. So those are, and now we are familiar with writing the Apex classes and creating the objects, and then invoking the objects, invoking the methods of the Apex classes and all that. So with that said, we are moving to the Apex triggers. I still need you to catch up on the SOSL language, but I will give this information how does the SOSL works. So as we progress. So I didn't miss that, and I'm still having it as part of my agenda. All right. So today we are going to focus on the Apex triggers. Okay. All right. So to start with, what is trigger? We used to say in our language, right? I mean, so this guy triggered me, or I got triggered, which means that it's invoking somebody to do something, right? That's called the trigger. So here, in terms of Salesforce, we have it as Apex trigger. What is the Apex trigger? Meaning invoking the invoking the trigger. Like whenever we do any of the DML operations, we can have the triggers to do something. So excuse me. Basically, the Apex triggers enable you to perform some custom actions before or after the events. What are the events that we do? That in terms of the DML, we do insert, we do update, and we do delete, right? So whatever or undelete. So whatever you do here, all of these are called the DML operations. We did talk about extensively about the DML statements that we used. Like even you can wonder that, hey, why did she miss the upsert and all that? Upsert is nothing but insert and update together. It's called upsert, right? So at the database level, either it is going to be an insert, or it's going to be an update, or it's going to be the removal of the record. Removal of the record is nothing but delete, or it's going to be the rollback. Whatever we deleted, we are going to put it back. It's like undelete. That's the rollback. So whenever we do the DML operations, or actions like this, we can perform the custom action. Those custom actions are called the triggers. Actions are called the triggers. I will tell you the real-time example as we go through. Even we wrote some of the triggers a couple of weeks ago. I'll tell you what is the real-time examples, how it is used and when it is used and all that. So just like the database systems which suppose triggers, in the database, if you are familiar with the PL SQL, they do have the triggers in the stored procedures. When we say they do have the triggers. Similar way, Apex also provides the triggers to manage the records. Okay. All right. If you are familiar with PL SQL in the Oracle, you must know that hey, create trigger name. We will write the stored procedure in such a way that to trigger before the DML operations, insert, delete, or undelete, not undelete in Oracle, update or delete. All right. Typically, you use the triggers to perform operations, right? So, and you can use the triggers to do anything you can do in Apex. Whatever you did in Apex class, whatever we did in Apex class, we should be able to do that in the Apex triggers also. Okay, including the execution of SOQL statements. Okay, and you can have calling the methods, or you can even call the Apex method from the trigger, or you can even execute the Apex method from the trigger. The trigger can call, for example, the triggers can call the Apex methods, or even execute the SOQL statements. All right. So when you use the triggers to perform the task that can't be performed by point and click tools, when we say that, so when we say point and click, it's nothing but the push button. Like, when we have a push button in the Visual Force pages, like, there are situations like, where we can trigger, like, we can even initiate, or we can even use the triggers to perform the task that where we, so say for example, you have a button, and on click you want to do something. You can use the trigger to do on push of the button in the Visual Force pages. Okay. You can even customize your Salesforce pages, like, so when we are having our, say for example, if you want to validate the field while you are updating your record, or like, you want to write, like, the admin, you might have seen, like, validation rules. Hey, if this criteria is not met, you don't save the record, something like that, right? So for example, even like, if you are, okay, you can only update the record. You can only update the record if the user is the owner of the record. Meaning, if I created the record, if I own the record, I should be able to go and update. If Pratap or like, like or Akshat, whoever created the record, they individually can log in and they can update the record. If I go and update Akshat record, it's going to fail. So these are the things of validation rules that we can achieve. Like, we can even by the admin we can configure, but programmatically you can do it with the triggers. Okay, you can still do it. You should be able to do it as a programmer through the triggers. All right. So now we extensively discussed. Now we are clear with what is the trigger. Like, okay, the trigger can be executed or it can be initiated during any of the DML operations like insert, update, delete, and delete, and it can do all operations. Like, for example, whatever the Apex class can do, like, calling the method, executing the SQL statements, or it can be triggered from anywhere, or even the validation rules can be achieved with the help of the trigger. So this is the overall idea of the trigger. Okay. Now we are coming to see, like, okay, so what is the method, or like how can we create triggers? How can we create triggers? How do we create triggers? Simple. So whenever we create a trigger, there will be a skeleton that will be created in the system by itself, like trigger name, trigger name on object. It could be a standard object or a custom object. On object. Okay. So when I say object, the trigger can be performed on, where do we do the DML operations? Like all of these operations, we do it on the objects, right? For example, accounts or contacts or leads, case, opportunity, or even the custom object. Whatever the object we have, we'll be able to do all of these operations, right? So what is this trigger for? Trigger name on object. This is nothing but S object. We'll be just mentioning, like, S object. Okay, or the object name, whatever. And then here we call it as trigger events. I'll tell you what are the trigger events. Okay, and then this is the code block. You can write your code block here. You can write a code block here. Okay, so code block means whatever you want to achieve, whatever the logic, whatever the solution you want to put, whatever the validation you want to happen, whatever like an external source that you need to call, anything that can be written in the code block. Okay, so now we know trigger. The trigger will have its name, trigger name on object. We know, like, we are going to write a trigger for the account as an example. And now let's talk about the trigger events. What are trigger events? Like, Before even we talk about the trigger event, let me tell you something about types of trigger. Types of trigger. There are two types of trigger. So one is before, the other one is after. Okay, there are two types of trigger. The one is the before trigger and the other one is the after trigger. So the before triggers are used to update. Like, whenever we do the insert or whenever we do the update, before updating the record or before inserting the record into the database, all of these operations or all of the manipulations will happen. These are called the before triggers. Okay. So before they are saved to the database, technically, before the record is saved to the database, before the record is saved to the database. And the other type of trigger is the after trigger. This is like, okay, the after triggers are it will happen only after we save the record to the database. Then you might wonder, hey, okay, after it's saved, then what is the point of using the after triggers? We still have it. After it saves the record successfully into the database, we might perform some operations like, updating other objects or notifying somebody, or we can access the field from the object that got saved. If I'm trying to save an account called, account is for example, Apple is my account, right? So when I'm trying to update or save a account called Apple, then I could say okay, so whatever the data that I updated, I should be able to access it. But before we save it, we will not be able to access that particular record. We should be able to access the data that is going to be saved any point of time. Even before, trigger can also get the data before it is getting saved into the database. Even after, we can get it. But there are certain fields like last modified date, right? Those can be accessed only during the after trigger, whatever it's set by the system. So after triggers are used to access field values that are set by the system. Only the system sets it only when it's saved, like last modified date, or those things can be, though we know the record data, though we know the record details, we should be able to get the system related information only we do the after trigger. Like system related. That's the difference. You could ask me hey, okay, what is the difference between before? We said that before the record is saved and after the record is saved. Think about it. We could stop saving the data if some of the things that doesn't fit the requirement, or some of the things are that doesn't satisfy the rule that we write. We could even stop saving the record into the database. So that is why we call it as before triggers. After triggers is okay, we saved the data, and after saving the data, we can access the system related fields additional to the object related fields. We already know what are the object related fields that we are going to save. If I'm going to save the account, I know that account name is Apple, account contact information is this, and account address is this, blah blah blah. And after saving the data, I should be able to get with additional to the object data or record details. I should be able to get the system related fields. So system related fields like last modified date. Last modified date field, I'll say. Okay. And one more thing is so these are the things that can even make changes to the other records. Like for example, if you want to, after it's saved, the related fields, if there are some related fields, it will also update the contact records and all these things. So these records that fired after the trigger are read only. You cannot rewrite it. It's just read only because it got saved already, right? The records whenever it updates the related records, those related records will be just we can only read only after triggers can only read read those data. After triggers can only read those records because it's already saved. Okay, you will not be able to override it. Again, we need to trigger the data. Okay, so these are the differences between the two triggers. These are the differences.
Hello, Karthik.
Hi.
This last modified, yeah, this Pratap. This last modified date, we cannot change it through after triggers, right?
No, you cannot change it through after triggers. You can only access.
Okay, just to fetch those data.
Yeah, you can only fetch the data. But before trigger, you will not even be able to fetch this data because last modified date will not even be there because the record is not saved yet. Only you will be able to access it only after the save, right? Because that is why I said last modified date is nothing but the system related fields. These are not like a custom or like the object related field. There's object related field that user provides. This is the system related field, which automatically gets populated. It's not object related field. If the account is the account name is Apple, you can even replace Apple with Samsung. Those are the object related fields. But with related to the objects, these are the system related fields that will be generated only after we save the data, last modified date. I'm just giving this as an example. There are a bunch of them, but I'm just giving this as an example. Okay. So that is the difference between the before and the after trigger. Are you able to follow?
Okay. Yes, got it. Yeah. Okay.
All right, cool. So these are the major differences between the two triggers. Okay, the before trigger and the after trigger. All right. So the next thing that I thought of telling you is the trigger events, right? So we have the trigger events. All right. So in order to execute a trigger before or after, we do have so what are the things we can do? We do before insert or after insert. Those are called the trigger events. So for example, before insert or before update, before delete, after insert, after update, after delete. And the important thing is you have it one for undelete. There is no such thing called before undelete. There's only like an after undelete. You can only do the delete and then you can do the after undelete. Once undelete has happened, you can do something. That is what it is after undelete. There is no such thing. This is one of the interview questions or the certification questions. They will specifically mention hey, okay, so after delete, after delete, these are the things like they can do it in the trigger and they'll do one of the options as after delete. No, there is no such thing called after delete. There is only after undelete. Undelete happened, what we can do. So that's the only thing. After undelete is the event, one of the trigger events. Okay, there's no such thing called before undelete, right? We cannot do something we cannot do undelete before we do the delete operation. So that is something like after undelete. All right. So to execute the trigger, these are the multiple trigger events. We have it. And let's see. So these are the trigger events we said. Okay, let's go and create a trigger. Let's create a trigger. Let's create a trigger and see how it works. All right, let's switch back to the Salesforce. So hope you are clear with what is trigger and what are the types of triggers and what are the triggers that can be executed and what is the syntax of the trigger to create and what is that, the trigger can be created on the object and what are the trigger events, what are the differences between the two types of triggers like before and after and the difference between the before trigger and the after trigger. And we have seen extensively what are the trigger events that is available. Okay. So now let's create a trigger. go to the change source and then click on the developer console. Okay. So let's go to the file, new. See, we have extensively discussed about like what is the Apex class and everything, right? The next step is the Apex trigger. Okay, this is the Apex trigger. So as soon as you create, like let's click on the new Apex trigger, it is going to pop up. It's going to show a pop up. What is the name of the trigger? Like, for example, like or like dev trigger or like dev training trigger, whatever, something like that. Okay. So we're having it as development training trigger. Okay. And to which object that we are going to write the trigger. Okay. Let me see, like if you can go on. Okay, let's choose the account object. We are going to write a trigger on the account object. Okay. Submit. When you submit, it is going to give you the skeleton. That's the cool feature about the Salesforce. Like it is they're very flexible in helping the developers in creating the skeleton or like giving the pseudocode. Okay. So if you see here, whatever I explained before, like trigger name on the object, this is the trigger events. Whenever we create, by default it comes with before insert. Okay, it always comes with a before insert. Let's start off with a very simple example. Okay, like I'm just going to write a simple system.debug and tell that okay, this trigger got initiated before insert. Okay, that's it. I'm saving. All right. So I created a trigger and I wrote a piece of code. Like as I said, like here is the code block that we need to write. This is the code block, and I wrote a code block here. That's a simple print statement. Okay, we'll write something in a momentarily. Excuse me. All right. Now let's go and see like how to initiate this trigger. How do we do that? We need to create a account object, and then we wrote it for before insert. Even before insert gets inserted, like this trigger has to be initiated. This account needs to be executed before the insert of account object. That's our goal. All right. Let's go and create an account object. One way is like you can go to the admin and you can create an account, a new account and all this. Let's not do that. And we are developers now, so we are trying in the developer training. With admin, like we can go to that account and do that. That's admin job. Let's do it in the developer way. All right. Let's go and test it with the debug as an example. Okay. So what do? We have to simply create an account object, right? To create an account. All right. Account equal to. So this is the object. We're creating a new account, and we say like name of the account equal to name equal to right. Development training trigger. Development training trigger. That's it. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to execute here. All right, it all got executed. Okay, so nothing pops up here. So go to the trigger. Okay, so let's go to the debug. Okay. All right. So what is the problem that I did? I made a mistake. What is the mistake I did?
But I think you didn't inserted it.
Right. Let me insert data here so that it gets triggered. Okay. All right. So that's good. All right. So I'm trying to execute now. I'm trying to insert the data here. Okay. You see it now? This trigger got initiated before the insert, whatever we wrote it. So whenever it's an insert operation, it got triggered, and this is the trigger that got triggered. So let's go and see now. Did we create a account object? Excuse me. So this is the sales app and development training trigger. So that's the latest one. See here, this is the development training. This is the trigger that we created, right? And yep, so it's like last modified by or like created by. These are the system generated things. So this is how the trigger is getting created and it's getting initiated. Like it got triggered when we do the database operations. Like create. All right. So hope you're all clear with that. One of the things that I would like to say is okay, is it going to be always that only one trigger event? This is the trigger event, right? Is it going to be always a one trigger event? No, you can have multiple trigger event. Okay, how do we have the multiple trigger event? That can be separated by a comma delimiter. It can be delimited by a comma, so that you can have before insert, and then you can also do after insert. You can have the before insert, after insert, even after update, before update. You can do all sort of things with one trigger. You might ask a question now, hey, will the system how will the system know that we are writing a logic here and we are just being it wide open? So which means that in this case, if I go on update, this code block will get executed. If I do the insert, again this code block will get executed. If update happen, or if after the update also this code block will get executed. After insert also this code block will be executed. So this will be printing it twice. We are having before insert and after insert, right? Technically, let's check it out if that works. So I said that the system, the trigger events can be separated by commas. All right. And we are going to write a statement here. Okay. Then I'm going to mark it as trigger 1, just for our purpose. Trigger, and then debug only. You see it here? Same code block executed twice. Previously it was only once. Now it is this trigger got initiated before insert, this trigger got initiated before insert. Because the same code block will be executed for both the before insert as well as the after insert also. This just wanted to prove that the comma separated, or the delimited by comma, we can have the multiple events, trigger events. Okay. Then you might ask a question that hey, is it possible to see if the trigger is if the record is getting inserted or updated? Yes, we do have an option. So we will talk about it in a minute. Okay. All right. So now you understand what is trigger, how the trigger can be created, how it can be initiated, and what are the trigger events, and we can have the multiple trigger events on the object. So with that said, okay. So let's move on to the something called very useful, something called context variable. Using the context variable. This is more advanced of the triggers. Okay. So this is a simple thing, what we learned about how to create the triggers and the objects and everything. All right. So context variables. All right. So when we're talking about the context variable, right, we are not going to write in the real-time scenarios the system.debug. right? That is to understand what is the trigger and what is the concept of the trigger. That will help, like, system.debug. But usually what we do in the real-time scenario is we will want to access the data that comes into the trigger. If the record that came in now, whatever the account record came in, how do we do that account? How do we process the data before the insert, and how do we process the data after the insert? That is the whole point of having the trigger, and that's how we deal with the triggers in the real-time scenarios, in the live projects. Okay. So in order to do that, how do we access the record that caused the trigger to fire? There should be a record that caused the trigger to fire, right? Who fires the trigger? A record fires the trigger, and the record gets inserted or updated or deleted or like undeleted or whatever. So okay, so there is something, a keyword called trigger.new. The context variables, right? When I say the context variable, it's called trigger.new. So when we're talking about like trigger.new, it contains all the records that were inserted during the insert trigger or the update trigger. All the records that were, all the records that were inserted or injected or like inserted or created during the insert or update triggers. So the reason why I wrote here is like, trigger.new. Excuse me. Trigger.new. So when you say like trigger.new, what does that mean? If you see the variable itself gives us the information like it is a new data that is coming in. It is a new data that is coming in. When does the new data that come in? Either we create a new record or we update the existing record. When we update the existing record, say for example, I'm having like name as like contact record, like for example, Karthik as the first name. I should be able to update my email address, or I should be able to update my phone number. In that case, I'm still getting the new data that is coming in as part of the record, right? Even though like the contact record exists, I can even update that record with the additional information with the phone numbers or the email address. Those are even the additional data. Similarly, when we insert the record, all the information or all the details about the record is all new. So we should be able to access the record that causes the trigger to fire with a simple context variable called trigger.new. Okay. And there is something called trigger.old. What is trigger.old? So I will write a piece of code to explain you the trigger variables, context variables. So in that way you'll understand better. So the trigger.old, it provides the older version of object, S object, like whatever we create. Everything we are going to do all the trigger operations based only on the S objects. Okay, this is objects. So the trigger.old provides the older version of the object before they were updated. In the update trigger, when we use the update triggers, before they were getting updated using the update triggers, they should be able to provide the trigger.old will give. If you see it carefully, I used the word only update. Trigger.old provides older information of objects or the objects, older information of the object before they were updated, okay, before they got updated by the update triggers or deleted. Try to check this. Updated by the update triggers or deleted by the delete triggers. Okay, so if you can see the difference, this is again one of the interview questions. Like, you cannot use the trigger.old context variable when you insert the data, because how will you get the previous version of the data? For example, when you're inserting the record, or when you're inserting the record of type contact, like Akshat, right? So when we are trying to Akshat Srivastava, like, when you're creating the contact record, when you're inserting it, there is no such object or record already that exists called Akshat Srivastava. We are creating a new record, brand new record. So the trigger.new context variable can only be available during the inserted, whenever we do the insert, during the insert operation, or like insert trigger or the update trigger. Okay, that is where you get the trigger.new. You cannot get the trigger.old when you get the insert, because that is a brand new record that we are inserting. But if you see, but the trigger.new is available in both update as well as insert. Okay, but the trigger.old will only be available in the update, because you already have Akshat Srivastava, who is the record, who is the contact record, which already exists in the system, and you can still get the older version of the object. Also, when you delete using the delete triggers, okay, when you try to delete, you can still get the older version, like, before you delete, like, what is the older version of the object once you get deleted, something like that. So that is the difference between the trigger new and trigger old. These are very two important concepts, with additional to whatever I said previously about this undelete. So those are the things that you can focus on from the interview perspectives, on the certification perspective, because these two are quite interesting things that can be used on specific scenarios, that cannot be used. I mean, you cannot go and use, like, tell that the trigger.new is always available even when you delete, or like, the trigger.old is available for insert. No, that is not true. So these are the things they will put this combination factors, and then they will give the multiple choices to select. Okay, so I think when I attended one of my certification, I did got questions around this area, trigger.new and trigger.old. Right. So let's see, like, how do we access? So since, as a recap, we were talking about all the trigger events, and now we move a little further to talk about the context variables. So we have like two context variables, which is called trigger.new. The other one is the trigger.old. Now we know the difference between the trigger.new, which can be accessed when we do the insert or the update of the existing records. Insert or update will happen only through the insert or trigger update triggers. Similarly, trigger.old can be used to gather to capture the older information of the object. When they got updated, you can get the older version, and when they get deleted, updated will be triggered by update triggers, and the deleted will be triggered by delete triggers. So that's fair enough. Okay. Any questions so far? Was it all understandable? And I just want, if you have any questions, just type in the chat. I can address anything that you have. All right. So now you wondered that, hey, Karthik, okay, so we created a record, a simple record, and then, we made a trigger to fire, right? Or like we made the trigger to get initiated. So was it always like, the trigger can fire? The trigger can fire when one record is inserted, or many records are inserted. Like, we can do the bulk insert. Because we have already seen it in the previous session, how to do the bulk insert, right? Like, we created a list object, and then we created a list objects with a bunch of records, and then we inserted the list. Remember those things? So even that is basically what it's doing in the background. It is doing it in the bulk. But eventually, what do we get out of it? We are getting the data getting created, data getting inserted, right? You create like, one account like Karthik, or you create a list of account like, Karthik, Pratap, Srivatsa, Akshat, and all those things. Like, see, if you have a bunch of data in the list, and when we do the insert list, again, we are getting all those records to be created. Even at that point of time, the trigger will get fired. Basically, the goal here, or the bottom line here, is the trigger is fired on the object based on the event. Okay. So it's not that it gets fired only for one record. It will be fired. Even you can insert the records via the API. We'll talk about it in later, like, how you can access the API. I'll plan for a session for the APIs to integrate the APIs. All right. So similarly, when I talk about you can fire the trigger with one record or with the multiple records, the trigger.new, right? The trigger.new can contain either one record or the multiple records. Say, for example, I update like 10 records at a time. So how this trigger.new will have? This trigger.new will again have the multiple records. It's really based on how do we fire the trigger. Okay, let's see how that happens here. When such things happen, okay, I see like new user coming in, caller 1, caller 2. Okay, I don't know who is the caller 1, but it's fine. All right. So okay. So as I said, the trigger.new or the trigger.new can contain only one record or the multiple records. What happens like how do we access like when it has the multiple records? Well, we can iterate through the trigger.new. The trigger.new, itself is a list. Either it can act as a list or it can act as a one single object or one single piece of information or the data. It really depends on how do we do. What is in the scope? What is in the context? Based on that context, it will act like a list or it will act as like a one single object. That is why in Salesforce it is called as in context variables, using the context variables. So these are the two variables that are used as the context variables in terms of triggers. Okay, let's see how do we access the trigger.new variable. Okay. Hope everything is clear so far and you're enjoying the class. Please let me know if you have any questions. Okay, I just keep asking this like before I progress anything, just to make sure that you are able to follow me and there are no confusions here. So we just want to make it crystal clear as possible. Okay, like whatever I communicate to you. So that's why I keep asking like any questions. Just make a pass. There's nothing wrong in making a pass for a minute and then asking, do you have any questions? Let's move forward. All right. Let's talk about how do we implement the trigger.new. Say for example, I'm going to modify the existing trigger, so I don't have to write a new trigger. So let's see, like before insert, right? When it comes and before insert, this is getting printed, which is fine. And for example, like how do we access the trigger.new? Like I'm having like for loop, and then this is an account object, right? Account A, something like that. Account object equal to. So here's the thing. I'm going to use the context variable trigger.new, and then I'm going to iterate the list. So here, if you see, when it comes to the for loop, we have already gone through these exercises in our previous session. How to iterate the data, how to fetch the data from the object or from the list, right? This is the list, and we just iterate with this, and then we are putting it in a single object, and we will manipulate the fields from this object. All right. So now we are going to say like okay. Say for example, I want to update the descriptions. A dot description, right? Description of this record equal to let me say like updated the description with the trigger. Because this is the trigger. We are updating the description with the trigger. Okay. We are not having this description when we create a data. Like, say for example, so I'm writing this piece of code, this very simple piece of code, like a couple of lines, or like, the simple piece of code to make you to understand how we can access the data. So that is what the real time is all about. Like, before insert, I get the data that comes in, and I can write all my logic, whatever related to this account or the record that's coming in, right? Like, the real time, I'll explain you the real time scenario so that you don't forget. So what is the trigger that I wrote recently? All right. So I'm updating the description here. As an example, I'm updating the field. You can do all your calculations, you can do all your manipulations, or you can do all the math between the different fields. You can do the validation rules, you can put your logic here, you can calculate your final data that needs to be copied to the another field, or like you can even update your related fields or related records. So all those things can be done here. All because the reason why I'm explaining all of this is you need your record to be in scope, in context. That is what the trigger.new will do. Whenever it comes in, whatever the record that comes in, that will be in scope, and you can manipulate everything, and then you can do all the manipulations to play with the trigger, or to get the data from the trigger and to manipulate the trigger, and then utilize the trigger data. So whatever the trigger data gives you is trigger.new. Okay. For now, I'm just updating. I'm not telling anything here that I'm going to insert this data is coming in. If you see it here, there is nothing. I'm going to create now one new account. Let's name it as Apple, an example. Okay. And then I'm updating the description with the trigger. Okay. So that is what the trigger is all about. And the trigger.new is going to give us. Okay. So let's try it out. I'm saving this. I have a problem. What problem we have? Okay. Okay. Line number 3 it says, right? So I should be having this one. I'm not assigning anything. I had a typo here with a equal to. That's not the way it should be because we are iterating, right? So I have to have this guy. So that's why I get access this object. Okay. And now there is no problem here, so which means that it got compiled. So we are good. Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create the anonymous window in the new account. I'm just creating. Okay, I'm just going to rename it to Apple. It doesn't really matter. I can even rename it to 2. Now we are getting a trigger, development training trigger 2 get created, right? If you see the 1 development training trigger, right? So hold on. So if we go here, this is the trigger 1 that we created, right? And when I get the trigger 1, I don't see any of the description here. The description is empty. Okay. And now what I'm trying to get here is, okay, I'm just doing the same thing again, but I'm getting the scope. Whatever this record gets in, or whatever the record that fires the trigger, that will. So whatever the record that fires the trigger, that will get the scope in the context variable, and then I'm going to process this particular record, and then update the description of this data, and then I'm trying to insert. Then I'm inserting it, which means that technically I should be able to insert a record with the description, and then it inserts, and then it gets inserted because we are writing it as before insert. If it is like after insert, nothing will happen. So I'm just doing it before insert. Which makes more sense. Before insert, I'm processing all of this, validating it, and then I'm inserting it. So that is why we call it as before insert. That's the trigger event. All right. Let's try to execute here. Okay. So yeah, this trigger got initiated before trigger. Okay. Before insert. Well, all right. Let's go to the Salesforce and see and click on the account. This is the trigger true, right? If you see the trigger true, you see this description. Updated the description with trigger. The trigger is the one which updated this description. So whatever the data that came in was in the scope. Whatever the data that came in was in the scope, and then updated the description field. So that was in the context variable, and then it got updated. So hope this is clear. So that's how we use the trigger.new variable or like context variable to update. Okay. Now let's talk about 5 minutes. Like, hey, what are the real-time scenarios that I have used? All right. So we're working for a company called and they are dealing with the sales team, like sales engineers, and they have like several hierarchy, like sales people, like sales engineers, or they have the sales reps. Other than that, they do have like the regional manager or like its own manager kind of thing, and they do have the senior manager or the somebody will also be playing a profile called deal closer. Like whoever is closing the deal, he will get notified, something like that. Okay, for example, let's take a look. When there is an opportunity, right? The opportunity when we have the leads, whatever is generated. Like if the lead is more than the opportunity is getting converted to accounts or to the contacts or like to the accounts. When we convert the lead to the opportunities, like if it is if the amount is more than 2 million, the senior sales manager needs to be notified. Okay, so we achieve that. I mean, as an example, I'm saying like there are like tons of scenarios, but I'm just telling this scenario just to make sure that you're getting it, and then you're putting it in your mind so that in future, like you can remember this, like what are the scenarios that you can the trigger will be helpful. Like whenever the opportunity cost, like whenever they change the stage to 1, or like when the stage is closed, if the revenue or like if the dollar amount is like more than 2 million, like when they do that on update, like when the sales engineer goes and updates the opportunity, that will get notified by the senior sales manager, that he's not getting notified for everything or every single sale. He gets notified only when there is an amount that is more than $2 million, or like equal to or more than $2 million. He will get notified, which means that it is a big account for him. So it needs the attention from the senior management, or like senior person from that particular department to take care of the accounts. Like if it is like $200,000 or if it's like $500,000 deal, like sales reps will take care of it, and it doesn't have a big deal. Whereas if it is like a $2 million deal, then it does make sense for the sales manager to step in and then to you can't hear me, Akshat?
Yes, Karthik, I'm okay now.
Oh, okay.
There was little disturbance in between, yeah.
Okay, so because there are callers coming in and out. I think Pratap was okay now. Now you're okay, right?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, cool. All right. So those kind of situations, in the real-time scenarios where we will be using the other triggers. So the next thing is like, there are like, some other context variables are available within there are like some other context variables that are available within the triggers. Like, I just told you, like, only one context variables, like, trigger.new or the trigger.old. There are like some other context variables that returns the Boolean value, like, yes or no. So based on that, the code can flow. You can manage your triggers. So it indicates that, the trigger will be fired, or the trigger was fired due to an update, or like, if it is like a different event. So there are like various context variables. For example, like I told you, right, when we had like, before insert or after insert or before update, after update. So during this, like, multiple events, multiple trigger events. When we have like multiple trigger events, we should be able to identify if it is an insert or update. So in that case, we need to check, like, okay, so if this trigger is insert or if the trigger is update. So that, okay, so let me go and type something here. Okay, you can write like, there are like other context variables that are available for triggers. For example, like, trigger dot is insert. You can check. If it is insert, then you can write a piece of code. Like, all of this can happen, right? As an example. Yeah. So if it is an insert, I'm just writing this piece of code. All right. And then, so like, I can even say that, else if trigger dot, else if trigger dot is update. This insert or is update, right? If it is an update, I just don't do anything, or I just simply write like, this trigger is initiated for update, something like that. Okay, you know what? So I should be able to put this one, replace this logic here. Control X, Control V. I'll just copy this logic here and then put it here. So that if it is update, then I'm going to update the description information. Okay, if it is insert, I'm just going to write, this trigger got initiated for insert. It's just insert. Okay, I can remove this guy. So if you see here, you can literally write your code block based on the condition. You can split the code, the trigger logic based on the condition. So this is what I explained to you before. When we have multiple events, trigger events, how do we differentiate the multiple events? Like, hey, when the insert comes, I want to do something. When there is an update, I want to do something else. So in that case, we do have to use the context variable. Whatever we discussed the context variable before was like, just trigger.new and trigger.old. In this case, there are like other context variables that are involved as part of the trigger, and that is called the trigger event. The trigger dot is insert and the trigger dot is update. Okay. Let me try to execute here and see what happens. Now during the insert, it just gets insert and it doesn't update the description. That's how it should be. And it will just display the message. This code should not get executed technically, because I don't want to waste time to writing the update code here. So let's execute the same thing. I'm trying to insert now 3, right? So basically, I'm firing up the trigger during the insert. Okay, we are inserting the record called trigger 3, which means when it comes here, it should only get the insert. It should just print. The description should not get updated. The description will get updated only for the update trigger. Okay, this is like update trigger is update. Okay. Okay, I wrote here before trigger, before update, after update also. All right. Let's try to insert a record here. We go to the debug only, and we see this got triggered before insert. Wow, that's good. And then we go back, click on the accounts. Oh, see, this is the 3. And if you look at the description, okay, you know what? This trigger.new. Okay, so this is the classic example. Like this trigger, right? This trigger got inserted. Okay, so this is like a, if the trigger is insert, we are getting this. Okay, and we are also doing that after insert. If it is like after insert, again it is getting triggered again one more time. So that is why it is getting updated. Okay. So say for example, if I just take out this piece of code, if I just take out this piece of code and say if it is update, or like, or else if I just make it as like, is delete. And say that to differentiate that this trigger got initiated for just delete operations, right? The reason being that, it got updated is like we are using 2 triggers. Insert, we are using the same trigger for before insert, after insert also. Okay. So what it does is like, even after the insert, the trigger.new is getting triggered and then it is getting injected into the data. Now, if you see here, it is like delete. Okay. Before delete. Now, if we can literally differentiate, like if it is insert, this will come, and if it is delete, this will come. Okay. Let's see this. Now, what I'm trying to do here is, this is the 4th one. Okay, this is just an insert. See here, this trigger got initiated. Just because, why is it getting triggered twice? Because it is getting triggered for new insert, before insert, after insert. Okay. The reason why I removed that piece of code was it doesn't come here. It comes here. I purposely removed that because I want to explain you why is it coming twice. Now you can see that it's coming twice, right? Because one is before insert, the other one is after insert, and we are calling here only during the insert. This insert, yes, it is going to get updated. It's going to be there. Okay, so if you just have it as its update, or like if it is like update, even if it is update, when you are going to like we are triggering this before update, so it will get triggered because we are doing this if it is update also. Because this piece of code will be triggered. Now we are not doing the delete operation. Okay, we are not doing the delete operation. If it is update, like after insert, it will again come inside. So now based on this, like if it's insert or like it's delete, it is going to be this context variable is going to return true or false. Based on that, it is going to come inside. Now this code executed twice just because they're having like all the triggers, like before insert, after insert. It will come on. This will get executed for before insert, and after it got inserted, it is going to again get executed one more time after insert. That is why it is displaying 2 times. This makes sense. All right. So the one additional thing that I want to tell you is like, okay, so we can have like I want to teach something about the trigger exceptions. Oh, okay, so he's not there. Okay, not here. Okay, that's fine. So we have something called, okay, before we move forward to that, what are the context variables? What are other context variables that is available? Like, other context variables. Now, if you go, so we tested this, right? If you go here to the accounts and trigger 4, there won't be any description here because we did not trigger the the update ones. The trigger.new is no longer in the scope because that is not in the update or insert. So this is like, that was in the delete, remove that. So the update, the description was not updated. All right. So what are the other context variables that is available? Like, for example, I told you like, is insert. Is insert is like, it returns true. The trigger was fired due to an insert operation. Or even it could be from the Apex class or from the API. The other one is like, you also saw the is update. So returns true if you're using the update operations. The trigger was fired due to an update. Similarly, there is like another in context variable called is delete. So here is the one key thing that I want to tell you. One is before. You can even have the context variable called is before and is after. Like is before is nothing but like, it returns the true if the trigger was fired before the record was saved. And is after is nothing but it returns the flag like, okay, yes, it got triggered, it fired the trigger after the record was saved. Like, is something called is before or is after. So based on that, all of these context variables only you can use to your code separation, or based on your condition, you can write your logic. Okay, if before we want to do that, because when we say is before, it is wide open. It could be before insert or before delete or before update. And then we want to write like one more condition is before and then again is insert. Only then it will go applicable for only during the insert operation. If you just leave it just before, like it will go and execute like, even before the insert or before the delete or before the update, anything. So you have to specifically specify is before and then another condition to say is insert. If both the things got success, only then the code will get fired. Okay. So these are the things that returns the Boolean flag. Based on that, you can write your piece of code. And that's like another in context variable called new. We already discussed about it. Trigger.new, which can bring you the context variable of that particular record, whatever it returns the records of the S object during the insert, update, and the undelete. Okay, and the records can only be modified before triggers. It cannot have after triggers. It can only have the before triggers. We already discussed about it here. The before triggers. All right. So these are all the context variables that are available as part of the triggers. And you can even trigger. The last thing is like the last information I would like to tell you is like, as I told you before, what does the trigger can do? The trigger can do like, it can even call the Apex method, right? So we have written like, we have written a lot of Apex classes with the methods. Okay. So let's see, like, let's pull up one of the methods that we wrote in the past. For example, open classes. I think training one maybe. Okay. So let's see. Like, we have a training one. This is a simple Apex class where we wrote our first method, an example. And this is the new string that we're going to write. Right. So let's see, like, what happens by calling this. I'm just going to change, like, it's not going to return anything. I'm just going to print the value. And then it's just going to call this name. Okay. So this is the Apex class, and this is the method from the Apex class. And then doesn't exist. Okay. So this is just going to print the value. And I'm just going to just print the value. Okay. I just wrote the simple method. All right. So this is my first method as an example from the training class. All right. So let's see. So this is the trigger that we wrote, right? Like whenever we do before insert, let's take all this, and only before insert. If it is insert, I'm just going to call, method. I'm not going to print this. Instead, I'm just going to call like training dot my first method. All right. So this is, we wrote a logic. What we did before was we wrote a logic with the new context variable to update the description, all those things. And I also explained you the real-time scenarios where we will be using the variables, the context variables. And we also discussed about the other context variables like, insert, before, insert, update, and delete, and all those things. And like, is before, is after, all of those. Here we are triggering based on those, like, if insert means we are triggering the Apex method. Okay, let's see how this works. The thing that I want to explain you here is like, you can even write the logic here, or you can even call the Apex class from the Apex trigger. So that's one of the things. All right. So I'm trying to call this trigger based on the account object and before insert. All right. Let's go open this anonymous, and then we are creating a new account, and I'm trying to create on another record, right? Trying to execute this. You see here, the Apex method is getting called. This is my first method, hooray. I just randomly opened one of the class, and this is the method that is being called from the trigger. And that trigger is called only here, only when it is an insert. In case if it is delete, this will be called. The method will not be called, and it will be called. And during the insert, during the delete operation of the object, the same trigger will be called. And then we are checking if it is delete. This just prints the statement, and it's not going to call the Apex method at all, Apex class, Apex method from the Apex class. So that is how you can even use your trigger to call the Apex class. You can even call the Apex method. Okay. So the next thing related to the trigger is like, I want to explain like, what are the trigger exceptions and what are the callouts. So these two things, we'll cover during the next session. Like, the next session, so I'll be talking about like with whatever the things that we need to discuss about related to the triggers are, like there is something called add error, and then callouts. So these are the two things that are much important when you're talking about the triggers. How can we add errors? in the page, and how can we initiate the callouts from the trigger. So these are the two things that we need to talk about the triggers. That we'll be just wrapping up the Apex triggers, and then we will be moving forward with the Visualforce pages and all that. So any questions so far, Akshat? Were you able to follow me? Was it useful? Were you able to get this concept?
Yes, Karthik, I'm good. Session was good.
Okay, cool.
Helpful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Second, sorry?
It was helpful.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much. That's what I want. I just want to make sure that you are following, and then the session is the session is providing you some valuable information. All right.
Yeah.
So we'll be calling. So we'll be winding up now, and I will discuss about like add error and columns, which are more important concepts in triggers in the next session. And then I'll also be. I don't want to miss those. I'm also going to discuss with you guys related to the Apex testing. How do we do the testing? How do we create a test data? How do we do the unit testing? So as a developer, you also need to do the unit testing, right? So I'll teach you all those, how do we do that and all these things. Because this is more of a, they're spending a lot of time in that classic development, which is fine, which is okay. I just wanted to make, because you are not aware of all these concepts, right?
Yeah. Few basics I was aware of, but not completely in much detail.
Oh, okay. That's good. All right. So, and then, I'll be taking the rest of the Visualforce pages, concepts and everything, and then we'll be moving to the Lightning. Okay. All right.
Sure.
Cool. So now you can get a confidence of being a developer, and then you can do your hands-on, and then you can get familiarized with your Apex classes, methods, and triggers, and how to call all those and everything, right?
Yeah.
And then, cool. All right. So I'll also be teaching you a little of the API stuff. How can we call the APIs, the external APIs and all that. So that is called the callouts. So we'll be discussing in the next session. Okay.
Okay. Cool.
Thank you, Akshat. Meet you in the next session. Okay. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Well done.
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.